not just women are in danger, but all marginalized people, where being uniquely different right now might truly be considered a crime. It seems as though we had all slipped into a false sense of comfort, that justice would prevail and that good would win in the end. Well, good did not win this election, but good will win in the end. So what today means is that we are far from the end. Today marks the beginning of our story. The revolution starts here. The fight for the right to be free, to be who we are, to be equal. Let's march together through this darkness, and with each step, know that we are not afraid. That we are not alone. That we will not back down. That there is power in our unity, and that no opposing force stands a chance in the face of true solidarity. And to our detractors that insist that this march will never add up to anything,
Bostonred here with Friday Java, a weekly magazine of political theory, polling, and commentary. It is part of the history called people that make up this fascinating journey. We are part of the Obama network. For that, we make no apologies. What we pledge to do is give you the facts on a bridge to history, what body politics is, the most up-to-date theories of political science and psychology. Stay tuned for this incredible ride. Bostonred, peace out.
Friday Java, our magazine program on the 22nd of December 2017 from WBRN Radio in Boston and on the Bostonred Network. We roam along. A programming note here, a couple of programming notes. We will present, let me make sure these dates pan out here as to when the 25th is on a Monday, so the 24th is on a Sunday. We'll have on Sunday, which will be Happy Christmas Eve, as we call it, falling back on the long-serving British journalist Alistair Cook, who wrote a column, a letter from America. And Mr. Cook died a few years ago, but we always bring him back around this time of year. Nonetheless, we'll have that on the 24th. Which will be it'll fit perfectly here. Our Sunday programming, special Sunday programming, will be the Happy Christmas show. I believe that's how we're going to do it. And on a Monday, we'll have the Monday morning quarterback. Makes a little bit of sense. And on the we're there today. Sorry about that. On the 23rd, which it's tomorrow, we'll have the week that was. Now we have all our programming straight, at least for this time around. And on the let's see how we're going to do this. Yeah, on next Saturday, which will be New Year's Eve, we'll have the normal New Year's Eve program. And we've got it straight here. And our first year program on New Year's Day will be the Monday morning quarterback. We'll also start carrying in, hopefully, regularity the Reich report. Dr. Reich, of course, an economist at Berkeley. He served as a Treasury Secretary in the administration of Wild Bill Clinton. He is normally on Facebook. We'll carry the audio portion of his, and we'll link to it also. Nonetheless, to the Crystal Ball, they will be off next week. They'll be back on the 4th of January. They're wishing everyone a Merry Christmas, a Happy Holiday, and Hanukkah too. Is Hanukkah over now? Anyway, and we'll be going incidentally into Kwanzaa, so we don't want to forget Kwanzaa either. The title here is The Minnesota Twins, a complete history of double-barrel Senate elections. This is by Godfrey Skelly. I don't know why we just call him Skelly. Anyway, Al Franken, and we'll have a little bit from Al Franken, and we have a special program on Al Franken, his last address to the Senate of the United States, and his falling back on the memory of the late, great senator from Minnesota, Paul Wellstone. Resigned due to allegations would create a vacancy in the Class 2 Senate race in Minnesota, and it will precipitate a special election in the North Star State in November. In other words, it'll be in November of 2018. The governor has announced that Tina Smith will assume the post, and she will assume that post on the 2nd of January. She intends to run in the 2018 election for the remainder of Al Franken's seat. And the regular contest will be in 2020. And normally the way these things work out, if a placeholder like Smith does run and does win the election, she is in a better shape to win in 2020. Period. The seat is due to regularly contest in 2000, but because Franken didn't immediately resign, there was some speculation that he might reconsider leaving office, which he should have done. Senator Manchin of West Virginia wanted him to remain in the Senate, and so did others. Senator Leahy of Vermont, he decided that it would be better for Al Franken to remain there. And a number of other people editorialized for that, and we at this mic also supported that position, that Al Franken should have waited and let the Senate committee do its work, Ethics Committee. And once that report was rendered, then Al Franken could decide his future in the Senate. Now, what this does is it creates an interesting situation in the state of Minnesota. We'll get to that in a minute. By appointing Smith, who was the lieutenant governor to the seat, a Republican immediately will be the lieutenant governor according to the Minnesota Constitution. But now there's the debate and an opinion rendered by the solicitor in Minnesota that this person cannot serve as a lieutenant governor and also in the Senate as the president of the Minnesota Senate, and that is out of the office of Ms. Swanson. So we'll read that in a minute, but let's get on with the ball game here. The Class 1 seat, they used to call it the senior senators, Amy Klobuchar, now known as Poor Amy, who is also seeking re-election. So this is a double barrel situation that the two will be up. Amy Klobuchar has been far ahead in the polls. She positions herself as a middle-of-the-road Democrat. Period. The fourth are currently, all women delegations in California, New Hampshire. Washington presently also, this is Washington State, has 2 women in the Senate. With a number of what we call double-barrel elections, Minnesota pair of Senate races will mark the 55th time a state has had a contest for both of its seats in the same day, the popular election era, which covered roughly the last century, 100 years. We previously reviewed the double-barrel Senate elections early in 2014 cycle. but in that case we didn't include 3 irregular Senate pairs in Alaska, Hawaii, and we remember those, and Maine that took place at time different from the standard federal election day in November. Additionally, we missed a duel out in the state of Colorado from 1924. The original article, which was pegged to a double-barrel Senate election in South Carolina in 2014, predated the event that led to Oklahoma also having a double-barrel election that year. And there's some tables here as to how it turned out to go all the way back to 1914 in Georgia. Somebody, Hogan Smith and Thomas Hardwick, they were Democrats and they held the seats back then. Georgia was a Democratic state. We won't go into most of these because they're in the 20s and no one would know who they were. Obviously, they've long since. But this is one interesting one right here. This is a special election in the state of Florida. And I'm not sure what date. 1930. Wait a minute here. Not the one I'm looking for here. Well, in 1924, when you're moving down. No, this is in Pennsylvania. It's not the one I was going to. Florida. We'll get there in a minute. Eventually, we'll get there. In Florida, 1936 was a special election in the state of Florida. Had Charles Andrews. They were Democrats, and Claude Pepper, the late Claude Pepper, who later became known as Red Pepper, became a representative. Anyway, that's the only reason we brought that particular one up. For those that remember Representative Pepper, he was a champion of the rights of senior citizens. 1946, Harry Byrd, Virginia. And let's see who else we had here. A. Willis Robinson, they held the seats in 1946. That's when Virginia was still a Democratic. And in 1948, Russell Long in a special election won in Louisiana. And Alan Ellender also on a regular won his seat there. And let's see, 1952, and Prescott Bush in Connecticut. That was the father of George H.W. Bush, and G.W. Bush won his seat in Connecticut as a Republican. In 1954, no one that you would know of, so we'll skip them. They don't even have a family name. To 1956, Strom Thurmond in South Carolina won his seat. He was a Democrat, then he later turned a Republican. And in 1958, Robert Byrd won a seat there in a regular election. Jennings Randolph, also from West Virginia, won a special election. He was a Democrat. They were all Democrats back in those days. And let's see. 1964, Al Gore, Sr., this was Al Gore's father in Tennessee. They were Democrats there. And Ross Bass, also the Democrat, don't know Ross Bass. In 1964, Strom Thurmond, he held a seat, and I guess Strom Thurmond had turned to a Republican by 64. I thought it was later than that. In South Carolina, the other seat, Ernest Hollings, later Ernest Hollings, was a Democrat at that time. And in Virginia, Harry Byrd Jr. held a seat. They were Democrats. That was in 1966. And one more recent one in Minnesota. That was a double-barrel election, basically. Also, the regular one, Rudy Boschwitz, he picked up a seat there in 1978. And Dave Durenberger also picked up a seat there in 1978. 1992, two senators out of the state of California, Barbara Boxer, whom has left, And Dianne Feinstein used to be the mayor of San Francisco, is still around. Two senators that have faded from the environment. Bill First, he was a surgeon out of Tennessee, and Fred Thompson, who is now dead, was out of Tennessee. They're both Republicans. Out of Kansas, 1996, Pat Robinson, he's still around. Sam Brownback, he is the governor of Kansas now. They were both Republicans. And, of course, he held his seat. And Felovitz is still in the Senate. Wait a minute here. 2008, Thad Cochran is out of Mississippi, and Roger Wicker. Yeah, probably better. That was in 2008. And in 2010, Chuck Schumer was the incumbent there. He won a regular election, special election. Kristen Gillibrand, she won that seat in New York. In let's see, 210 in Oklahoma, Jim Inhofe, who's been around a long time, somebody named James Lanford. And then in 2014, Lindsey Graham, that's in South Carolina, and Tim Scott, an African American there. So those were some of the people that got in special and regular elections. In other words, there were two at a time there, and period. And some footnotes here. Let's see. On Alaska elected its first senators concurrently in November the 25th, 1958. That was prior to granting of its statehood. It got statehood, for those around at that time, on the 3rd of January, 1959. I don't guess Sarah Palin was there. I heard of poor old Sarah Palin. Son attacked the husband, and he's in jail now, I guess. Anyway, that was in that story right there. Strange situation. He's evidently suffering from post-traumatic syndrome, something the Republicans didn't recognize. So anyway, the setup for 1978. We talked about this before. A number of fascinating parts. In 76, Walter Mondale won the vice presidency as Jimmy Carter's running mate from Minnesota, creating a vacancy there. Wendell Anderson, he was a governor, very popular person. Middle of his second term, opted to resign the governorship and have his lieutenant governor, Rudy Perpich, appoint him to replace Mondale in the what they call Class 2. We used to just call it a junior senator's seat, and I suppose now it could be Class 2 because of gender neutrality. Led up to the 76 election as a debate drew over what should have happened to Mondale's seat. If the Carter-Mondale ticket won, it was fairly clear that Minnesota took a dim view of Anderson eventual agreement. A late survey, a later September survey on behalf of the Minneapolis Tribune paper, today the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, asked respondents if Anderson should resign and be appointed to the seat. Should appoint someone else. 55% of the people. It wasn't very good for him. The poll was not even very good for Anderson. And thus, Anderson followed through. He faced the voters in a regular scheduled election. That would have been in 1978. The class was due to be contested then, regardless of the vacancy. So thus, Anderson's appointment and the Minnesota House of Representatives 3-1 by the DFL. Okay, responding to public pressure, a bill in 1977 that would have provided for a special election within 12 to 14 months of a Senate vacancy. But the bill died in the controlled House by the DFL. Meanwhile, the health of Minnesota's other senator, the legendary Hubert Humphrey, was deteriorating due to bladder cancer. After his defeat in 1969 election, Humphrey returned to the Senate by winning an open seat in 1970 to the Class 1 seat and easily a re-election in 1976. Humphrey had been first elected to the Class 2 seat in 1948. Served there until taking the oath of Vice President of Lyndon B. Johnson. Humphrey died on the 13th of January 1978, creating a vacancy that would necessitate a special election. So that's how it happened. The governor, Perpich, appointed Humphrey's wife, Muriel, to fill out the seat, though not expressly as a caretaker appointment. She said the election was too far off for her to know if she'd run in a special election, while Muriel Humphrey announced that she wouldn't run early in April. As it was, the Minnesota Republicans, at that time technically the Independent Republicans, the IRs, were well positioned to fight both Senate seats, partly because a Democrat occupied the White House in 1978. Midterm elections often break against the White House, and an unelected DFL incumbent also helped the GOP, Al Quinn. The evidently Republican nominee for governor tapped into dissatisfaction by putting up billboards across the state that read something scary is going to happen to the DFL. He called an election highlighting the fact that the state's two U.S. senators, governor, and lieutenant governor were all unelected Democrats. The sign became a famous part of the 1978 campaign. The first nail in the Democrats' coffin was division between the party's liberal and more conservative factions, a schism partially due to views on abortion. And it was exposed in the nominating contest. Both Senate races, DFL convention served as a warning shot to disunity, needing 60% of the delegates to earn the party's endorsement. The moderate Anderson only narrowly surpassed the mark on the first ballot for the Class 2 seat, which took 3 ballots and the liberal Don Frazier to clinch the party's endorsement to the Class 1 seat. But the convention's endorsement don't allow the party to avoid primary contests. Bob Short bypassed the convention, defeated Frazier on the September 12th primary, 48% to 47%, very close race, to win the Democratic nomination. Because of Short's nomination, some liberals defected to Dave Durenberger. He was a Republican in the general election. As for Anderson, he fended off his more liberal convention opponent in the primary, but still only won 57%, a mediocre mark for the incumbent senator and twice elected former governor. In the general election, divided Democrats suffered a huge loss. Durenberger defeated Short, nasty, 61 to 35 in the senior senator contest. I don't like the Class 1. Special election, which Rudy Botchowitz beat Anderson 57 to 40 in the Class 2 of the junior senator, what you want to call it that, contest. Perpich, who had appointed Anderson and Muriel Humphrey to the Senate, lost 52 to 45%, though he won the governorship back in 1982, winning re-election in 1986. The weekend top of the ticket performance for the Democrats helped the Republicans double their seat totals in the State House of Representatives. Also elected Arnie Carlson, who incidentally wrote an op-ed asking Al Franken not to resign. Carlson would defeat Perpich in 1990. That was a wild election, I believe. Look at it there. Anyway, with both seats in 2018, this will be the second double barrel for the state of Minnesota. So these double barrel elections here, 0 double barrel elections in Nevada, Utah, Arizona, Texas, North and South Dakota, and Washington State. 1 double barrel election, Oregon, California, Wyoming, Montana, Oklahoma, Minnesota, Iowa, Mississippi, Florida, Kentucky, Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Maryland, Maine, and Vermont. 3 double-barrel elections. That's a hell of a lot of elections there. Idaho, Kansas, Tennessee, and South Carolina, and New Hampshire. That's some interesting history we did not know. Free states with only one such election, and we already named those, so I won't get back into it. But that was in 1916, Maine, Alaska, when they became a state in 1958, or before they became a state. Hawaii in 59. And Alaska and Hawaii, their elections that took place just prior to statehood. We won't get into all that. To close, we mentioned a great degradation, sometimes to consider when thinking about a double-barrel Senate election in 2018. John McCain was admitted, of course, to Walter Reed Hospital. He is battling brain cancer, ongoing battle with, that's brain cancer, a lethal brain cancer. We tentatively hope that the senator can overcome this very serious, if people don't overcome it. Still a vacancy because of resignation of Senator McCain to help troubles, or worse, a possible Arizona open seat there. And of course, Jeff Flake is retiring also in 2018. So that could happen. So in other words, these be some opportunities, particularly in Arizona, but in the state of Minnesota, part of the problem there is those internal fights there. It's a working class state, and depending on what the issues are and how the great tax ripoff of DJ Trump goes along, it could open up possibilities for the Republicans, particularly in the rural areas. And if there's dissatisfaction from the way Al Franken was drummed out, literally out of the Senate, there would be another possibility coming there also. So those are the kinds of things that one of an article I want to look at very quickly here is in Minnesota, the legal contest that is shaping up there over this Republican type opinion ads to the battle. Now this is Michelle Fleischbach, I suppose how to pronounce it, cannot serve in the Senate. That's what the opinion said, and also be the lieutenant governor. That is from the state's attorney general's office. The solicitor there. This is Michelle Fleischbach, who is slated to become the lieutenant governor in January. Would violate the state constitution if she tries to simultaneously hold two. This is Laurie Swanson. She is the Attorney General of Minnesota. And the Solicitor General there, Alan Gibson, he noted that the Minnesota courts would have to make the ultimate determination potential conflict exists if the same individual were to fulfill both the executive and legislative roles. We've just received the opinion of the Solicitor General. That's according to some from Fleischbach's people. Fleischbach decision to try to hold both offices to be hugely consequential. At the state capitol, Republicans now control the legislature by 34 to 32 with one seat vacant. If the DFL could hold on to the Southeast Metro replacement, recently departed senator there, Strodom, I don't know who he was, in special elections called for February 12th. Then win a subsequent special election to replace Fishbach, they would take over the majority. Now, she is, I think, in a Republican district at Fishbach, a Painville Republican, said she will not resign. Fishbach's St. Cloud area district has been a solid Republican. The DFL still would like to use a special election as a big opportunity. Well, could happen. But these larger Republican districts, it would obviously depend. And it's a larger Republican, it appears more rural district, much harder usually to get those. But we've had situations in some of those rural districts in Virginia. Not talking about around the capital, but some of the more rural districts. And in the late, great Jerry Pippin's red state of Oklahoma, there were some upsets there also. So it would really depend on where the districts are. But Dayton refused to get involved. It makes it likely the Senate DFLs are a flashback would launch a lawsuit trying to remove her constituent. So in other words, yeah, he's staying out. It's wise to do it. But he never would have been in this situation had he not appointed Tanya Smith. The wise move would have been to appoint someone else as a caretaker, perhaps. The National Democratic Party wanted somebody that would establish a role and run for re-election. Now, Smith will be challenged by some. We don't know whom. Possible could be the progressive Farber and Keith Ellison is a congressman from that state. We don't know at this point in time. Let me just look quickly at the polling here, and then we'll go to the sports. This is from Real Clear Politics. Some of this we did last night. We won't go over all of it. Just saw an article here out of the Las Vegas Review-Journal, A Christmas Miracle for Trump. I doubt it very seriously. Anyway, from Gallup, and Gallup polling has been the premier source for presidential approval numbers. They have old DJ Trump at 35. He lingers in the 30s. That's on Thursday. On Wednesday, we'll just repeat this for posterity, maybe. Reuters put DJ at 35. YouGov Economist at 41. And let's see who else here just did any polling for DJ Trump. Well, the generic ballot, Reuters has Democrats up by 12, too early to CNN up by 18. YouGov Economist up by 9. Enough of that flummery. Let's quickly look at, incidentally, the in Carolina, the separatists won the election there. We'll have a special report on Carolina, and we'll see exactly where the independence movement in Carolina, that is from Spain, that'll be on Bostonred on the World, our international program. We'll also have Senator Franken's speech to the Senate, where he talks about the great Paul Wellstone and his farewell to the Senate as a special program in our modular series. We'll have those links up probably tomorrow night as we do those programs. And also Jill Stein. Jill Stein talks about McCarthyism and how the Republican-dominated Intelligence Committee, having this in the Senate, is trying to link up her campaign with the Russian Federation. Very interesting situation as she has a cast on Facebook. We'll link to that also, but we'll present the audio there. And again, Robert Reich, Professor Reich, will have his normally weekly reports one day a week. I think he gives those on a Tuesday, with the senator having his. This is from the Washington Post. We'll get it. The shutdown is averted. They have moved it into January. And the headline from Senator Franken, we are losing the war for truth. Senator Franken denounces DJ Trump and the GOP in his final floor speech. I doubt if they would care one way or the other. His own associates have sent him, as they say, walking along on this government stoppage scheme. The Republicans were going to stop everything up. They passed a separate $81 billion disaster relief bill, but the Senate did not immediately take it up amidst objections from the Democrats. The stopgap funding measure through the 19th of January temporarily extends CHIPS, that's the Children's Health Care Insurance Program, which lingered politically since it expired in October. A Veterans Health Care Program and a warrantless surveillance program set to expire. I don't think that's going to fly. its essence, the Congress maintains the government programs and services essential, for the nation's stability, nation's stability of our economy, for the security and well-being of the American people. That's the House Appropriations Committee Chairman Freddinghausen. Anyway, never heard him. Said anyway, it passed the House 231 to 188. And cleared the Senate 66 to 32. The congressional vote are expected Tuesday's congressional votes are expected to be the last of 2017. The vote came after the GOP leaders scrambled Wednesday and Thursday to gather enough votes to keep the government open, literally. And it's continuing a resolution there, so that's where they're going. Let's see what else. Senate Democrats who have the ability to block any spending bill if they stick together, wait until Thursday to see whether the House could manage to send the bill forward. Schumer said Thursday that the Democrats would agree only to short-term measures as long as broader disputes about spending, immigration, and more remained unsolved. So they had some fight back from the Latino Hispanic Conference on the Dreamers. So things going on here. On the last day, Democrats opposed the tax bill. Well, that's a done deal there. And we have a spending problem, and et cetera, et cetera. The waiver passed 91 to 8. Advocate for lower spending. Well, forget about that one. But anyway, they passed the stopgap spending bill last night, and pushing it to January, and some of the objectives go there. They passed it there, and a warrantless surveillance program set to expire. I guess they threw it in. I have to look at that. I think they're talking about the one we reported on previously here, involving the FBI. Sometimes we don't get all of the information here, and one of the shortcomings of journalism these days, we have to go back and then look at it once more to see exactly where they are. The top lawyer at the FBI has been reassigned. The moral authority of the presidency is in tatters, according to Michael Gearson. Well, it's been in tatters for a long time. Papa John's CEO resigned after criticizing the NFL. Well, it's time for him. I will step down. Anyway. Northeast winter storm. These storms are coming. Could ruin Christmas travel. No doubt. One of the things of a global warning. And on a sad note here, a sports legend has passed away. Dickenberg, he was 82 years old, died in San Diego. Done Final Fours, the Angels, the Padres baseball games. He was in broadcasting for 60 years, Super Bowls. Dickenberg was in all of those. A sad situation, period. But, unfortunately, we all go when we go, I suppose. Enrollment, incidentally, in Obamacare nearly matched last year's, and it had a last-minute surge, period, on Obamacare. We'll do that tomorrow night. Let's do the sports now as we wind down here. Right one. This is the Hall of Fame rankings for NBA candidates. We won't go over all of these, but at the top of the list, Jason Kidd, if you remember him, he's been retired, and Steve Nash, Ray Allen, number 3, Chauncey Billups, number 4, Grant Hill. Everybody remembers Grant Hill. He was around a long time, 4 times with Detroit, and Ben Wallace was in the this is Grant Hill, 1996 Olympics. Ben Wallace. He was a 4-time Defensive Player of the Year, defensive man there. Only behind, remember Horace Grant. Horace Grant used to be with the L.A. Lakers. Chris Webber, number 9. Kevin Johnson, along with Maurice Cheeks. Holloway and Johnson had been a trio have been on the fringe of Hall of Fame consideration. Maurice Cheeks should have been, in my opinion, in a very long time ago. Period. And this was number 10 in Kevin Johnson. Maurice Cheeks definitely, Johnson, and Mr. Hardaway. Is his name Hardaway? Yeah. Anyway, on to the scores. And last night, finally, the Spurs were at the Jazz. Jazz 100, the Spurs 89. The Bills were in Cleveland. Cavaliers 115 to 112. Very close game there. The Raptors were in Philadelphia. Raptors 114 to 109. The Celtics were at the Knickerbockers. Knicks 102 to 93. And finally, the Grizzlies at the Sun in Arizona. Sun 97 to 95. This will do it for us. Have a good weekend. Have a good weekend and a good holiday weekend as we start to approach there. Saturday, and of course, then Sunday. Retailers are hoping for big Sunday Christmas Eve sale. A happy Christmas to everyone. And on the 26th, we begin the legendary Kwanzaa. We'll have a portion of Senator Franken's speech that follows, and then we'll have a special presentation of Senator Franken. Good day.
President.
Senator from Minnesota.
I may consume.
Without objection.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. This is my final speech on the floor of the United States Senate. I've come down here many times, as we all have. We come here to cast our votes on bills and amendments. We come here to discuss and debate the issues that are important to our states and to the country. We introduce and explain legislation, and we talk about our states and what we learned on our latest visit to a community health center, a farm, or a small business. What we don't talk about all that often, Mr. President, is the work of all the men and women on our staffs who make all of this possible. I've been fortunate to have had a dedicated, hardworking staff both in Washington and in Minnesota, and I have no doubt that they will go on to do great things and to serve our nation well. Mr. President, I'm also very lucky to have a wonderful family that has stood by me throughout the good times and the tough times of being a senator. As senators, we have packed schedules. There are late nights, difficult votes on divisive issues, and a lot of time invested in better understanding the challenges that our constituents face every day. And all too often, that important work doesn't leave enough time for our families. I'm grateful for my wife, my children, and their spouses who stood by me and who've helped me to do my work effectively. And finally, Mr. President, as I leave the Senate, I take great comfort in knowing that my successor, Senator Designate Tina Smith, has a well-earned reputation for being a smart, diligent, hard-working public servant, and I have no doubt that Senator Smith will serve Minnesotans and all Americans exceptionally well. Mr. President, when most people think about politics, they think about arguments. The arguments that they have around the dinner table, the arguments they have online, and most of all, the arguments we have here in Washington. And that's a big part of the reason why a lot of people, just don't like politics. Often the debate here in Washington can sometimes seem arcane and tough to understand. Other times, especially in recent years, it can be so bitter that it doesn't even feel like we're trying to resolve anything, just venting our spleens at each other. I get that. I get why people want us to stop arguing and start, doing stuff. But since I'm leaving the Senate, I thought I would take a big risk and say a few words in favor of arguments. After all, there's no single magic solution that can bring all 100 of us together, because there's no one set of values that brought all of us here in the first place. I think many of you have heard me talk about what brought me to politics and what makes me a Democrat, and it's my wife, Franny. When she was 17 months old, her father, a decorated World War II veteran, died in a car accident, leaving her mom widowed at age 29 with 5 kids. There was one sibling younger than Franny, Bootsy, who was 3 months old. Franny's family made it. Barely. They made it, thanks to Social Security survivor benefits. Sometimes they had to turn the heat off in the winter. This is Portland, Maine. And sometimes, often, they were hungry because there wasn't enough food, but they made it. Franny and her 3 sisters all went to college on combinations of scholarships and Pell Grants. At the time, a full Pell Grant paid for about 80% of a public college education, but today it only pays about 35%. When Bootsy went to high school, my mother-in-law got a GI loan for $300 and went to college. She got 3 more loans, graduated from college, and became an elementary school teacher. And because she taught Title I kids, poor kids, all her loans were forgiven. My brother-in-law, Neil, went into the Coast Guard and became an electrical engineer. Every member of Franny's family became a productive member of society and a member of the middle class. You know, they tell you in this country to pull yourself up by the bootstraps, by your bootstraps. But first you got to have the boots. And the federal government, through Social Security survivor benefits and Pell Grants and the GI Bill and Title I, the federal government gave my wife's family the boots. And that's why I'm a Democrat. That's why I'm a Democrat. Over the years, I've heard Democrats and Republicans talk about their own values. The things that they believe that brought them to politics. The things that make them care about what happens here. I've learned so much from listening to the arguments we have in this country and the arguments we have here in this chamber. I've learned from Republicans, learned to respect, if not always agree with, their opinions, and learned how their backgrounds can lead them to reach, in good faith, a conclusion that I never could have imagined. And of course, I've learned so much from my fellow Democrats. But the person I learned the most from is someone who isn't here. For 12 years, the seat I currently occupy was held by Paul Wellstone. As I've said before, Paul was a tireless, passionate champion for working families in Minnesota and across the nation. He fought for veterans, for farmers, and for those who simply needed a voice. Paul was my friend, and Paul had a saying that I think perfectly represents the values and the principles for which he fought. He used to say, "We all do better when we all do better." That was Paul's creed. What Paul meant by that is that the whole country, the working poor, the middle class, and the well-off, the whole country does better when each and every one of us is able to contribute to and participate fairly in our economy and in our democracy. I think Paul was right. But not everybody does. Some people's values are different. Some people believe that those at the top are there for a reason, and that they shouldn't have to concern themselves with what's going on in the lives of people who haven't been so lucky or even so accomplished. Some people believe